So I'm going to ask one question, and then I hope that there will be immediately follow-up questions from the audience. We have only 20 minutes in order to talk about something of extreme importance, mainly software at war. Alex, tell me, you probably realize, and these discussions in the morning show, that the Russian invasion of Ukraine has, of course, reaffirmed the importance of conventional warfare. But at the same time, what has it told us about the importance of technology? What has it told us about the importance of software? And what kind of lessons do you take away from the last 7 months of the war that Russia waged on Ukraine?
Well, it's important, obviously, to go back and look at what were expectations and what then happened. The expectations, obviously, were, depending on which country you were sitting on, that A, the war wouldn't happen, B, it would happen, but Ukraine would lose. And I think, in all honesty, we may be the only people I know of who predicted that the war would happen and Ukraine would outperform. I think it's being viewed around the world. Of course, there's always a diagnostic of what happens in a war. Most of that can't be discussed in public. And so the diagnostic, the private diagnostic, is that David beats Goliath, where David is a hero and armed with certain conventional instruments, but heavily empowered with technology. And that Goliath isn't actually Goliath and you just look at, I think one of the miscalculations that was made was America spends about $800 billion a year, Russia about $65 billion a year on defense, roughly the same percentage of GDP. And I think the Russian calculation, much like other adversaries of the West, was, okay, they spend more, but half of it is wasted, and they're not willing to fight, or not willing to fight to win, including sacrifice of human lives. The politicized cultures, they're going to make bad decisions, look at the decisions they've made. And it's very similar to what you might find in a Keynesian context, where that Keynes doesn't work unless 1 or 2% of the money spent actually is spent on disruptive stuff. So in the defensive context, if 2-3% of your budget is spent on things that are expected not to work, like most people, historically software has been something that you spend money on and get no value for. And then, at least in the commercial context, it's moved to something you get limited value for. But where you supply transformative instruments of war or of commercial, that 2% spend actually is as important as the other, $750 billion delta.
So when you say disruptive stuff, what do you mean exactly?
Well,
Give me an example. If I had a 2% budget, what do I spend that 2%
First of all,
for?
the most important thing, in my humble opinion, having been at this for almost 2 decades, everyone in this room can do is make sure your procurement process is actually a procurement process. It's not, we buy the software from my buddy, my friend, my cousin, or my local provider who may be more likable.
As the Russians do, I imagine.
But it's not just, look, Palantir, we fought the US government for nearly a decade, including going to court. Most important people in the world came into my office, which was modest at the time, and said, quite literally, some people will conclude that you're an asshole if you sue the US government. By the way, we sued the US government not to buy Palantir, but to have a procurement process where they acquire software, not a large tender from lobbyists. This is one of the most important things we ever did as a company, because it wasn't set up to help us. It was set up to make sure that software is not just a spend item, essentially welfare to local industry. And in war, your ability to use, what does it mean to use software? How do you control your special operators? Where do they go? Where do they leave? Do they get the SIGINT information while they're on the battlefield or while they're not on the battlefield? Do you get information from space? Does that information from space provided to the people doing the actual operation? Can you disrupt the information flow of the adversary? Can you map their information flow? Can you do, it's one of the really interesting things is people assume people like in this room and civil libertarians are misaligned. Actually, very much aligned, because if you're working in complicated environments, only very few people can actually know the battle plan. That's called data protection. And that data protection has to be done in the most granular way, a way that can be made transparent internally, but not externally. These things are information technologies, and the West has an enormous advantage over the East. Why? Because if you're going to build a company, you're not going to build it in a country where the company will be taken over by the government the minute it's successful. And quite frankly, we in the West, for all of our problems, are blessed with the strongest technological centers in the world. Fortunately or unfortunately, mostly in the West Coast of the USA.
And you're not afraid we're going to lose that edge? A lot of people are predicting China to be, the leading producer of sophisticated technology.
The reason people like to fantasize China will win the AI war is because they have certain advantages. Like their conception of human rights is just different than say, the West. In fact, it's the disadvantages that we have, for example, data protection, that is are on the battlefield, as proven, some of the most important advantages. Why? Because when you're doing global, essentially complete acquisition of data in your domestic context, you don't actually care who sees what. You want to see everything. On a battlefield where you can't be 100% certain everyone on your side is on your side, you just can't operate that way. And so, plus, honestly, one of the magical parts of technology is the best of the best of the best are the people who create all the value, and the best of the best of the best, by and large, don't want to work for a dystopian fantasy, whether that's in China, Russia, or anywhere else, or in America, or in Germany, or in Poland.
You have criticized in the past very much Silicon Valley. Can you tell us more? I mean, you are based in Denver, live in New Hampshire.
I mean, some of this is in America.
You say the U.S. is a technological giant, and yet at the same time you're very critical of many companies.
The original Silicon Valley 1.0 built dual-purpose technologies that were built for the military and then benefited the rest of society, primarily the West, but certainly America and the countries represented in this room. Silicon Valley 2.0 is largely built to transfer the highest value revenue to a tiny sliver of a tiny sliver of a tiny sliver of the tiniest sliver of people in the world, while convincing you it's a great thing by disseminating the thinnest, most hard to understand politics ever understood, called wokeism. And I'm a progressive, but this isn't, I don't believe actually progressive. And I believe that's a carcinogen on the West in particular, a carcinogen for which we pay a huge price, and is certainly not what Palantir is about. Silicon Valley, we see our role as being highly tethered to Silicon Valley 1.0, which is defending the West, creating dual purpose. I mean, the most significant part of our business now that's growing the fastest is commercial. And why? Because we spent over a decade understanding the underlying technical issues of working in a military intel context. And many of those insights are crucially valuable for industry, especially industry that is under pressure.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions as we move to our discussion? Don't see any yet, because I think there's yes, so there's a lady, and there's a gentleman there. So let's take the two questions, starting from the lady on the left, my left, I'm sorry, and then the gentleman on the right. Please, introduce yourself.
Yeah, so Joanna von der Merwe from the Center for European Policy Analysis in DC. So Palantir was at the center of some huge controversy a couple of years ago regarding some of the work with ICE, and obviously being a company that works in intelligence, there were some questions as to whether Palantir pushes the boundaries of the values that underscore democratic societies and human rights protection. What has Palantir done to address that? And can you give us some insight into how these companies are changing and adapting to really embody the values-based way in which we run societies and taking that in? I know I work very closely with your head of ethics, so just some insights and lessons that can be learned for other technological companies looking to work both commercial and
Palantir
in military.
No easy questions here.
Oh, I like the article. So Palantir, some of this, by the way, is inside baseball for America. I don't think anyone in Europe in any way would support the immigration policy that we have in America. I'm pro-immigration, but in reality of what we did with our product and what we continue to do with our product is it's used to deport people in America who are undocumented. This is largely not controversial outside of America. I think I lived in Europe most of my life. So the ethical questions involving Palantir largely, in my view, come down to what does it mean to work with software in a civil society, and that comes down to who sees the data, under what conditions, can you conform with GDPR or ethical strictures, legal normative components in America and globally. What's interesting about Palantir is there's only one platform I know of the world that actually conforms to these, and that's Palantir, which is why so much of Europe is powered by Palantir. And unfortunately in America, some of the critiques are just politicization. Like I'm very in favor of actual only buying software that conforms to the strictest norms, both because it's good for society and it's great for Palantir. And you see this in the countries that have adopted Palantir. But let me give you a slightly different riff on this. There's a famous quote from Wittgenstein, which is, ein Regel folgen zu glauben ist kein Regel zu folgen, which is to say you're following a rule. I believe the most important thing Palantir is actually doing is not whether we should be used to deport undocumented people in America, most of which were in the context of where we were doing it, involved in felonious behavior. I think that ends actually is more politicization than a real issue. I do think there are real issues around profiling and when do you use this software in a local jurisdictional context. We've walked away from building databases against Muslims and many other things. And there's some very, very legitimate issues that are concerning that are hard to answer in courts in a short form. But what does it mean in the West currently to use software? It means to defend your ideas. And why do I want to be here? Why are you here? Because the idea of sovereignty of a nation comes down to software heroism and an ability, which leads to the ability to push back on a larger, more powerful power. And the correlator of Wittgenstein is to believe an idea but not be willing to defend it, in my view, is not believing in it. Just like in the civil liberties context, to say you're pro-civil liberties but not take the time to understand what that means technically, by the way, I'm not saying that's what you're doing, is actually not to be on civil liberties. It's just to be red or blue factioned in America, when in fact civil liberties are a technical issue. To believe you believe in freedom, general flow of ideas, an ability to define what the border of your country is and not be willing to defend it, in my view, means you don't believe in the idea. And software, especially my company, Palantir, plays an enormous role in the defense of these ideas. And I'm very, very proud of that. And I think on the civil liberties debate thing, what I hope we move past red-blue civil liberties, neither of which are right. I've historically been progressive. I believe mostly what people want in the civil liberties community is right, although a certain percentage of them, it's not about that, it's about who you voted for. And I think that's a really bad way to do civil liberties. And we're now basically in a different context, and you're going to find people like me where civil libertarians have been skeptical of. I want to defend the civil liberties primarily by making sure the countries that are actually pro-civil liberties win by espousing the values we believe in. By the way, again, on the battlefield, not just in like protecting data, making sure people aren't profiled in America, conforming with GDPR in Europe, but on the actual battlefield where these things are often decided, the ability to segment data, to control who sees what, to purge data, to make sure only the people on your side in the specialized components see the data, i.e. exactly what you need in GDPR, is exactly what wins the battle, while actually being able to control your positions, understand the adversary, and disrupt their information flow. And it's the ability to win on that battlefield that actually makes sure you don't have wars, that the values we believe in actually turn out to be the winning values, that the best people are involved in these values. And that's why these conferences in Poland and why Poland and Ukraine are so important, not just to the people of Poland, Ukraine, and in Eastern Europe, but to all of us. And why civil liberties are actually crucial to what we've done. Mm-hmm. Of course, there's always what you do and whether people believe you. When you're supplying, I think we're the largest supplier of software, pure software in the world by a lot. And so people often wonder, well, if you're doing that and you're supporting clandestine services and police departments, how can you actually be pro-civil liberties? But what I would say in a longer format is that's exactly why you're pro-civil liberties.
Thank you, Alex. I think that's a very important discussion. Thank you for this question. I hope you can continue also later on this. But we had another question coming up. If I see, yes, please, the gentleman in the back.
Hello, my name is Adam Sobczak. I invest in companies whose main product depends on AI or machine learning, if you would. Not that heavy question, but as well important. I think we had in recent years, 10 years, some revolutions in industries like automotives. So disruptors went, and we shifted from hardware perspective to software perspective of the whole product. What do you think where military are now? They're thinking about the tanks, aircraft.
Well, you're going. So what is the influence of AI in the military? Look, everyone is watching. Like, if you are, especially if you're in an adversarial country, you are watching exactly what's happening in Ukraine, and what they are learning is that it's the combination of heroism, something which is inborn, can't be replaced, conventional arms, and what you're calling AI, although AI here is a synonym for platform data management and AI. And what they're also learning is, holy shit, with very little money, you can actually go up against, with resources that would have been irrelevant 10, 15 years ago in fighting us, you can change the game. The same way we learned in the Valley, that's why so many of these companies come from the Valley. With very little investment, you can massively outperform. Again, the most important thing you can do if you're in the military or in military operations now, though, is make sure that these very legitimate questions are actually being answered technically. If they're not being answered technically, like, does the software work? Work also includes data protection. It also includes data management. It includes, does the AI actually add real value? You'll spend a lot of resources and essentially get nothing. So essentially, long story short, the winners in industry and in government are people who can actually interact with technology, a new kind of technology, effectively. And it is new, it takes a lot of effort, and one of the most important things you can do, whether you're industry or in government, is depoliticize that. It must be depoliticized. You must actually implement what works, or you will lose.
Thank you, Alex. We have really 3 minutes left. Is there any other question in the room, or may I ask the last question to you? I'm sorry, I see there's, okay, so let's take one more question here.
Thank you, Peter Burns. It seems like Palantir is doing something unique in the space of defense, which is attracting sort of talented young people in a way that legacy defense industry companies seem to be losing to Silicon Valley. How are you doing that? What is the philosophy?
And I would do a follow-up question, because actually that was also my question. We were talking just in the backstage that you're interested in Poland and Ukraine because of the software talent, people that are here, and the software. But at the same time, although in Europe we produce great cars, we can't really produce great software, or at least we cannot compete with what's happening in the United States. So if you could combine these two questions, the last 2 minutes we have left.
I'm here, very honored to be here. One of the reasons I'm here is because of the software talent in this region. I would say Poland and Ukraine are shining examples. And we value the very unique kind of talent which you find here. I believe first thing Europe has to do is address the situation, like, stop producing copies of American companies and try to produce unique companies that are truly baller, to use the term we would use in the Valley. I suspect many of those companies are going to come from this region simply because in Eastern Europe, building exactly as much closer to Silicon Valley 1.0. You build software that you need for a war environment. That software better work. And then you figure out ways to use it commercially. You build on things that actually work, not on PowerPoints supported by your government that are largely supporting consultants that have never built a tech company. And this is very much linked to how you attract the best talent. This question, this is exactly the kind of question you have to answer internally. What is your software going to do? How is it going to create value where value is not just killing the adversary, but protecting your norms? And if you want to have the best of the best of the best, you have a talent spotter, which is part of what I did for, and am doing. And I go to the places where people undervalue the talent. That's like, I know the talent in Poland in this region is better than other people for lots of reasons. I go there, I spot the talent, I recruit them. And how do you keep them? You keep them by saying, hey, these are very tough questions. A normal company could never solve these questions. In our environment, they're going to be solved in a depoliticized way, which is very appealing, by the way, especially in America, because people are really tired of politicization. We can't get our politicians to stop it because it's so effective, and you can't explain why the country doesn't work, but you can explain why you hate your neighbor. It works in Poland and here because you guys are never going to be into that stuff. That just doesn't make any sense to you. You might pretend you're okay with it because you have a great alliance with us in America. No Polish person buys into that. And you come and you work in a depoliticized environment on the most important issues. And by the way, when COVID breaks out, the vaccine you got in America or in Britain, that's in Palantir. Most of the terrorists that all these things that you can't, the war in Ukraine, actually institutionalizing norms you believe in. By the way, institutionalizing norms does not mean writing a paper about them. It means winning with them. And that's a business problem. If you want to write a paper about norms in a politicized way, there's a 10-year track for you. But you're not going to want to go there anymore as a really talented quantitative person, because the minute you trip some qualitative line you didn't even understand, you're not going to get tenure. You want to be in an environment where your values win. And you know how you can do that? You build a software company and you get people like in this room to implement the software, and you say, hey, I know I'm not likable, but the software is going to bring you alive home and your values are going to win. You want likability? There's 50 companies that can do that, and they can do it in every jurisdiction. They know the best steak, they know the best golf course, their teeth are white. We don't do that, but we do attract and retain the best talent, and we build products, and the products are so powerful that people are scared of them. And they,
Yeah, Alex, thank you. Thank you so much. I think you've convinced a big chunk of the audience. Not sure if everyone, but I know, Alex, you'll be around, so I hope you'll have an opportunity to answer also direct questions from our wonderful Warsaw Security Forum audience. Thank you for being here with us, and thank you for talking about software at war, a very critical part of our response to the war that has been waged on us. Thank you, Alex. Thank you.